Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Lauren Randolph, and I am the Director of Programming for Frieze New York. And I'm very pleased to welcome you all to this exceptional conversation conceived of by Professor Sarah Elizabeth Lewis to discuss Black cultural leadership with experts from various artistic fields across the United States. This discussion is a key moment as part of a larger program during Frieze New York that is paying tribute to Professor Lewis and her multifaceted initiative, the Vision and Justice Project, of which some of the speakers here today have been previously involved. The Vision and Justice Project wrestles with the question of how the foundational right of representation in a democracy, the right to be recognized justly, has historically and is still urgently tied to the work of visual representation in the public realm. And more information about the Vision and Justice Project can be found on the organization's website, www.visionandjustice.org. We would also like to thank Prada for their generous support of this conversation. And now it is my absolute pleasure and honor to introduce our speakers. You can also find their full bios on frieze.com. With us today is Ava DuVernay, the award-winning film producer and director. She directed the Oscar-winning civil rights drama Selma, the Oscar-nominated social justice documentary 13th, and the Disney children's adventure A Wrinkle in Time, which made her the highest grossing Black woman director in American box office history. Ava, it is such an honor to have you here today. Thank you so much for being here. We also have Franklin Leonard, who is a film and television producer, cultural commentator, and entrepreneur. He is the founder and CEO of The Blacklist, the company that celebrates and supports great screenwriting and the writers who do it. He's been one of Black Enterprise Magazine's 40 Emerging Leaders for Our Future and Fast Company's 100 Most Creative People in Business. Thank you, Franklin, so much for being here and welcome. Artist Carrie Mae Weems has created a complex body of work that centers on her overarching commitment to helping us better understand our present moment by examining our collective past. As Professor Lewis recalls, she is an oracle of our time and has received countless awards, grants, and fellowships, including the MacArthur Award, and she is represented in the best public and private collections around the world. Carrie, it's an honor to have you. Thank you so much for being here. World-renowned trumpeter and bandleader and composer, managing and artistic director of jazz at Lincoln Center and director of jazz studies at Juilliard, Wynton Marsalis is a leading advocate of American culture. Wynton assembled his own band in 1981 and promptly began touring, performing over 120 concerts annually for 15 consecutive years. Marsalis has recorded over 100 jazz and classical recordings, which have garnered 9 Grammys and sold over 7 million copies worldwide. Wynton, it's an absolute honor and pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being here. Artist and professor Theaster Gates creates works that contend with the notion of Black space as a formal exercise. In 2010, Gates created the Rebuild Foundation, a nonprofit platform for art, cultural development, and neighborhood transformation on Chicago's South Side. He also has been awarded multiple prizes and has shown at prominent institutions globally. And on a personal note, also, his 12 ballads for Huguenot House at Documenta 13 has just resonated with me for years, and it's one of my most beloved experiences with art that I've ever had. So Theaster, thank you for that, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks so much.
And finally, our honoree of the Frieze New York tribute this year, Professor Sarah Elizabeth Lewis, Associate Professor at Harvard University in the Department of History of Art and Architecture and the Department of African and African American Studies. Her research focuses on the intersection of African American and Black Atlantic visual representation, racial justice, and representational democracy in the United States. She's the founder of the Vision and Justice Project, and her forthcoming publications include the Vision and Justice Book Project, which is under contract with One World Random House. And she also recently published an October file anthology on the work of Carrie Mae Weems on MIT Press, which is out in a few weeks. Sarah, it's such an honor, and thank you so much for being here and for bringing all of these esteemed, incredible people together today. And now I'm gonna turn it over to Professor Lewis.
Okay. Thank you so much, Lauren, for that kind introduction. I am very honored to receive the tribute this year from Frieze. I want to just first express my thanks to those who've made this possible. All the extraordinary colleagues of yours, Lauren, have put in so much work to come together and launch the first art fair in the midst of our pandemic. And it's such an extraordinary success. So congratulations to all of you. Thank you to Prada for hosting this event. I want to thank my colleagues and students at Harvard for the inspiration that they offer me endlessly as I embark on this work. And finally, I'd like to thank the Aperture Foundation for their constant commitment to the Vision and Justice Project. Now, I am very excited and deeply grateful to be here in conversation with 5 extraordinary hearts and minds and thinkers who have been foundationally important for the creation of the Vision and Justice Project. Ava, Carrie, Wynton, Franklin, and Theaster, thank you so much for taking the time to be here together today. I wish it could be in person, but this is wonderful. Yeah. I want to speak today broadly and have a conversation that feels a bit like a dinner party in the end about the central question that really animates this project. What is the role of culture for justice in society today? We are, of course, in an urgent moment in history. The country's been in such moments before, but I think what's unique about this particular one is that it has a distinct character. It offers us near daily reminders that the fragility of rights in the United States is not just secured by norms and laws, but by culture, by regard, how we see one another and how we fail to see one another. It's really a blind spot of the Constitution, one that the 14th Amendment was meant to secure. But we know, in fact, when you look at the history of this country, that the reckoning of our current moment has also reminded us that culture has really performed this work instead. It's given us a way to create narratives that enlarge our notion of who counts and who belongs in society. It's given us a measure of agency when law has deprived us of that. And I'd submit to you that if we don't fully appreciate the function of culture for justice, it's often because we only do so during times of crisis, of the kind in which we find ourselves in today. So I'm going to ask a few questions and know that you have some questions for each other. But I'd like to start, I'm actually going to start with a question for Ava, if you don't mind. I'm going to see if she smiles enough for me to continue. Yes, yes.
Sure.
Yes, okay. Because I want to really make clear to those watching that this Vision and Justice Project began, yes, with a meditation on the work of Frederick Douglass and his sort of Civil War speech that anticipated that we'd be thinking about the function of images and culture today. But with an exchange amongst artists beyond the visual arts, right? In music, in film, and beyond. And I was clear about 2 things when I began to put together that issue, that it needed to have a text about Frederick Douglass, which was written by Henry Louis Gates Jr., and needed to have an interview with Ava DuVernay, right, about image making and justice today. So I'd like to ask you a question actually about your thoughts to do with how culture can influence justice today, but just want to remind the audience of something they might not know. Our extraordinary philanthropist, Agnes Gund, created the now landmark Art for Justice Fund after watching Ava DuVernay's 13th, right? She was moved so much to do this that she then, in collaboration with Ford Foundation President Darren Walker, established that funds with the proceeds of the sale of the Roy Lichtenstein 1962 painting masterpiece. I wonder, Ava, if you might share with us your response to learning about that news and what it allowed you to maybe think about differently regarding your own practice, filmmaking, in the context of justice.
Absolutely. But please first allow me to say hello to everyone in this room and everyone who's out there, and to take a moment, a little bit of space for friendship, because I'm so proud of you, Sarah. I am so grateful for you. I am so joy-filled about the spotlight on your work, and just have to give a little sister girl rah-rah because this is a beautiful moment based on all the things that go on in that beautiful mind of yours. So thank you for having me. And I love you. Hearing that Agnes Gund did what she did, as you've explained, was propulsive in my view of what's possible, and really got me outside of a box of thinking that, you know, I make a certain kind of films for a certain thing to be consumed by people for entertainment, and with my hope that it can nourish them. Mm-hmm. And within that, talking about social constructs that need to be disrupted and historical context for the way that we live now. Yeah. But when Agnes took the film further, broke open the image, and breathed a new life into it, so that there are now other images beyond anything that I could have imagined that were birthed from that film. It was an expansive moment for me, and it was a deeply rooted, now, you know, firmly embraced lesson that I cannot name what my work will do. I cannot put a box around what I'm hoping for. I no longer answer the question that everyone asks out here in Hollywood: is, how would you like this film to be received? First of all, don't ever ask that question. But I don't answer it anymore, because that gesture and what she did made me understand the limitlessness of art, not in name, but in action. And the collaboration between the artist and the viewer, right? The relationship between the artist and the person that's going to sit and receive it, right? And what the tension is, and what the joy is, and what the unexplained, unimaginable possibilities of that relationship are. You know, all of what I said is not overstating, and also is not stating enough how much Aggie's you know, that fund and what she did means to me, and what it taught me.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be able to have this kind of fellowship together. Thank you so much for your kind words too about the work. I love you, Ava. Yes. I want to think about this idea you just raised about not knowing what the work can do in the world, and letting that be about possibility and limitlessness. And here, I want to now turn to you, Wynton, and ask you a question about integration and limitlessness. You occupy a really unique position in the society of artists right now. You're one of the very few I can think of who has collaborated with artists outside of your discipline constantly. I would take up the entirety of this panel by listing all the just musicians you've collaborated with. But so to say nothing of them, I mean, I'm thinking here of your work with Romare Bearden, or August Wilson, you know, or Ralph Ellison, right? Or Judith Jameson, right? Garth Fagan. And a question I have for you that I've never asked before is, can you talk to us about any fundamental principles that have emerged for you out of these conversations that inform how you think about the work of culture for change in society?
But first, I want to second what Ava said in recognizing you. We've known each other for a long time. I'm so proud of you and what you are doing and have done. We talked a lot about Frederick Douglass, and you open my eyes to many things because you've researched for many years Frederick Douglass. And I also think that what Ava said, what she said actually had a deep humility in it. And I'll say that's the first thing I learned from all the great musicians and writers, artists I've known, is the type of humility that's required to accept things that come to you, because you're not locked in your world so much in your defensive stance to protect yourself, that you can't receive love that comes from people. It came from Aggie. She's from another entirely different environment. We're human beings. we love and embrace each other in many different ways. So I'm just gonna run down kind of a roll call, not to take up too much time of the great artists that you named. I was very fortunate in my age and being young, 17, 18, 19, meeting all these unbelievable artists and at first not knowing who they were, because I was coming from New Orleans with rudimentary understanding and have an opportunity to get an education from them. So I would say with Alvin Ailey, hung with him a lot to understand what his vision was. And I think from him, I learned the necessity of developing a unique vision and to have the endurance to keep that vision alive, especially if the vision is countercultural. And I remember seeing his ballet To Bird with Love many years ago, and just struck by how he incorporated what Charlie Parker did in the motions and the rhythms and the syncopations, which are very complicated, into his style. Of course, we all know Revelations, but it's that type of thing. With Ralph Ellison, many times in Ralph's home, hanging with him, he's a trumpet player. And I played actually at his funeral. He requested that I play Black and Tan Fantasy, which I was honored to play. And he was always about the need to analyze your own experiences and to understand the totality of your experience. It's also tied into what Ava said, that it put a limit off of us. Hey, this is my experience. I'm experiencing this, and now this is going to be magnified much more than what I even originally intended. I can conceive of the world anew because my experiences are taking me out of who I thought I was and what I thought I was. And I know for Sarah, that's also true for you, because when we were talking about this years ago, you didn't know we were going to be up where we are now. And the idea, a quality idea, deserves to be in the place that it's in. Then that was always Ralph's thing, that you analyze your own experiences and that there in the life that you live is everything. And from Romare, I was so ignorant when I met him. I wanted him to do an album cover for me, and I drew out what I wanted him to do. And I gave him the drawing, and he looked down at the drawing. You know, you keep your head in the down position and you look up at somebody and it means something stupid has happened. I was so unsophisticated, I didn't know I had made a mistake. And he looked up and said, "This is what you want me to draw?" So I knew then I had done something stupid. So I started, "Yes, son," and jeffing and dancing, and "Yes, son, no boss, I don't know." And he realized, okay, the guy is just disrespectful and he's ignorant. I mean, he's just ignorant, he's not disrespectful. He gave me a book of mythology. He said, "Read this book of mythology, and if you answer the questions I give you, then I'm gonna work on this." I read the book. The first story was called Abu Qasim's Slippers. And the myth teaching you that if something is for you, it's going to come to you, no matter what you do to avoid it. Then I went to his studio every day. I would be hanging with him and he'd work on this. And over the years, we became really good friends. He said that Picasso told him, "Don't imitate us. Remember that you are a Black American and that's your strength. Don't mean avoid us, but don't imitate us." Also, Romare was encyclopedic with all the things that everything from Greeks to African mythology, he studied all those things. From August Wilson was the opposite of Ralph Ellison. He was always talking about the value of tribalism and ethnic mythology. And we were always arguing about this. I said, "Man, we don't want to be tribal." And he was talking about what moments in stories shape a mythology. Now, the ironic thing is when he passed away, I played also at his funeral, but he requested, for all the arguments we had about Black and white folks, he requested that I play Danny Boy and specified that I learn the words. So I had to just laugh. And from musicians in Black and white, I learned the need to present anti-minstrel show material. Do work and don't be a minstrel. Take yourself seriously. And that could be everyone from Dizzy to Jerry Mulligan to John Lewis. It doesn't matter. Dave Brubeck, I could name them. And that's some of the things that I've learned from artists from different disciplines. And the final thing about integration is to see what you have in common and find that thread, and that common thread is going to lead you down a road that you all can be illuminated. And that's why I look so forward to the conversation we're going to have, because everybody on this call has done so many fantastic things and we have a lot of common vision.
Beautiful, beautiful. Oh, thank you so much. I want to pick up on a theme you mentioned here about mythology and narratives that permeate time. And here I'm thinking about your work, Carrie Mae Weems. I have, in asking this question, I mentioned that I've gone to really each of you about the Vision and Justice Project at the start. And of course, you were a call that I had as soon as I learned that I would be editing the issue. I had to come to the 21st century oracle that you are. you know, the fact that I can't think about the history of contemporary art, modernism, African-American art without grappling with your work seriously is such a testament to the prodigious nature and the interventions you've made. It's just extraordinary. And I one of the many things as a historian, as I look at your work, besides, you know, loving you as a person, is that you ask fundamental questions of us in society. You have asked in Grace Notes, I think a work that everyone should see who's watching, you can see this on the Vision Justice Project, the Radcliffe website, is how do you measure a life, right? That's one question, for example. And you engage with even Antigone, right, in that piece, you know. So I wanted to ask you, Carrie, about, well, really, what fundamental questions you ask yourself at the genesis of a work of art. What questions does the Oracle ask herself before beginning? Can you give us a sense, Carrie?
Oh, Sarah, it's so great to see you all and to hear all of these voices, to hear this sort of extraordinary experience and to be so deeply connected to you all in these various ways. You are my darling, my star, you're my shooting star, sort of illuminating the night sky for us. And I think when I start a work, I think that I've been asking the same question repeatedly all my life. I don't think that it really changes. I think that we ask the same question over and over and over, and we're trying to simply figure out a way of entering the dialogue at any given moment in our lives as we progress and change and grow and rise and fall. But we are asking, I think, repeatedly a set of very crucial questions that allow us to anchor our lives, and then anchor the work. Because really the work is really anchored in the life. The life is not necessarily anchored in the work. It's really just the reverse, right? And so I think that I'm asking my question, what is the question? What is the question? What is the question that I need to ask of myself now? And what are the choices that I need to make in relationship to that question that I'm asking? When I often in the middle of the night, I wake up with this sort of extraordinary sense that I am human and that I am alive, this incredible entity in the midst of this fantastic world, that I am this little piece of dust blowing in the wind that has a certain kind of consciousness and presence at the same time. How extraordinary. I'm simply overwhelmed by this fact on a daily basis, that I am alive on this tiny little planet in the midst of some extraordinary thing. That when Einstein came to the end of his life, he said, well, there must be a God. I can't really think about it in any other way after knowing everything that I know as one of the great mathematicians and scientists of his generation, perhaps of our time. So the question really is the question. How do I formulate the question first and foremost for myself so that I can do the work, knowing that I am not an alien and therefore my audience will have a similar question, that they are questions that are operating in concert. So if I can sort of figure out the question that I need to ask for myself and make the assumption that there are thousands and millions of people that are asking themselves the same thing, right? And that my tool, my extraordinary gift, where that comes from, I do not know, but I'm grateful to have, might be simply the ability to look at it without fear and without trepidation, the ability to be critical without fear and without trepidation, the ability to dig deep and to go into spaces and places that can be uncomfortable so that I can dig into the question that needs to be asked of our time. And for me, I think driving my motivation always is, how do I unpack the extraordinary humanity of Black people in our time? How do I do that through a series of both representational images and images that defy representation, which is the thing that I think is so beautiful really about this panel, right? On the one hand, there's Wynton's music, which is not representational. It is perhaps in some ways the most abstract of abstract forms, right? Right? On the other hand, I'm making these very particular representational images. And now we're moving into an area, into a space where I'm really looking at, what does representation mean? And how do I use representation now, right? Do I need to use representation now in the way that I've done in my past if I want to have another level of conversation with a broader group of people, right? Where we're not necessarily dealing with what is Black and what is white and what is what, but rather what is deeply human and what is the thing then that connects us the most in our humanity.
Theaster, I want to follow up on a question that relates, of course, to how it is we honor our humanity. You have innovated a way for us all to understand how, I would say, craft effectively, and the care for materials can be a way to do that in communities. Can you talk to us about that connection in your practice, if you see it that way, if how I've described it is how you'd see it, Mr. Gates?
Thank you, Sarah, and again, it's a pleasure to be here. And Carrie Mae, it's so good to hear you and to feel like we're starting that dialogue, because I think in the same way that you're asking yourself, how do you do things without fear and trepidation? I think if we were to think about a craftsman and the possibility of shaping things, I think that as a maker, I'm shaping, but I'm also thinking about Ava's editing process. And in a way, the beauty of this moment is that we have, as artists, the ability to sharpen the image, use our gifts to make more clear the challenges that beset us, to make more realizable truths that seem buried, but just need time and exposure, and it needs the craftsman's hand to just pull it back. So we understand that there's this thing called a constitution, but in those words are written, and then the Constitution produced a history, but sometimes we need craftsmanship to shape that story so that we realize that there's been inequity, there's been injustice, there's been racism. And I feel like in some cases, my practice functions for me more metaphorically, that in a way, if I am at my wheel, if I am working on a painting, the painting is actually informing me about these other parts of my life, about the ability that we have and the agency that we have to shape thought, to control and be out of control with feelings, to impact through the image, through things, to impact other people's hearts and their worlds. So I think that part of what I've been trying to do is maybe connected to some things that Wynton was suggesting, was that there's a way in which the practice is transitive. It's like, if you think all I'm doing is making a film or making a pot, then that's great. Because then it's like capoeira. It's like a kind of fitness that one has access to, and you think on the surface is gymnastics, but in fact, there's a tactical strategy that's preparing us for insurrection or resurrection. And I think about my practice in that way as a kind of an emotional and physical arsenal that's allowing me to do good battle, good intervention in the world, good disruption. And I think that when you say, Carrie, you know, without fear and trepidation. That I think what I'm trying to work on now is not the what, but how can I engage this modality of courage so that I would say more clearly and more boldly the things that I deeply believe. And if I could do that without fear and trepidation, then I actually think that our practices will get better. And I think that, Wynton, I'm thinking about you, Ava, I'm thinking about you. Those moments when we have courage, it feels like courage is the primary shaper, especially in this moment.
Mm-hmm. I want to bring Franklin in here, and I know that at this point I also want to ask you to ask questions of each other on this point actually about courage. The analytical mind that is the extraordinary Franklin Leonard has been courageous in pointing out issues in the film industry, one of which you wrote about in the New York Times op-ed from last month, April 24th. Your work with the Blacklight Collective sort of prompted you to think about the cost of the film industry not addressing bias effectively, right? And I wonder if you could speak to us about the business opportunity that you see that there is, as you framed it, and a bit about the courage it took, I think, to arrive at this point too.
Yeah, it's funny hearing sort of everyone talk about courage and about sort of the role of art and culture and in society, and specifically as it applies to Frederick Douglass. It's funny, Sarah, I feel like you and I have been having these conversations for almost 25 years now, which is a bit staggering. And you were also the one who introduced me to the Douglass Pictures in Progress speeches, which was a really surreal moment for me because it included a reference to a quote that I had been citing for years prior, and I'm not even sure how I got it, which is this, 13th century Scottish poet Andrew Fletcher, if I may make the songs of a nation, let he who may make the laws, right? So this is, and that quote is actually often misattributed to Plato. So the idea goes back, conceptually millennia, that if you control the culture, the politics lives downstream. And so, yeah. Look, quick heads up, I reached out to my former employers, McKinsey & Company, last summer after the sort of Blackout Tuesday social media thing. McKinsey basically said, we're going to contribute $200 million in pro bono consulting specifically focused on racial equity. And I said, look, well, if you're interested in studying this issue, you may want to look at Hollywood. And not only is there a racial economic equity issue here, it has an amplifier effect everywhere else, because the stories that we tell or fail to tell are broadcast 40 feet high in theaters all around the world, on screens in our homes, on devices in our hands. And so there's an opportunity here that's not just do a consulting project to identify financial loss, but to begin to interrogate, we all know that there's a moral and ethical consequence for the biases that exist. And that goes back to literally The Birth of a Nation, Hollywood's first ever blockbuster, and the consequences of that film. But if you can make the argument that there's also a financial cost, perhaps it will be easier to make the argument to the people who actually are the decision makers within the industry about what is getting made. Because for the 18 years that I've been in the industry, the complaint has always been, well, we are pro-diversity. It is important to us, but it's a little risky financially. And at the end of the day, we're a business, right? And so the play here was, well, if we can get the people that you pay money to tell you how to improve your business to tell you that you are losing $10 billion annually in revenue, which was the result that McKinsey found, and to tell you on top of it that you are the least diverse industry in American business, which they also found, and then make several dozen recommendations on how to solve the problem, what we'd essentially be doing is gifting the industry with a treasure map to tens of billions of dollars. And that's just focused on the bias affecting Black folks. That's not even addressing the endemic bias addressing all women, the disability community, the LGBT community, and every other sort of racial and ethnic minority. So literally tens of billions, possibly hundreds of billions of dollars. If we give you a treasure map for free, perhaps maybe you'll follow it. But I think, and the reason why I wanted to write the New York Times editorial is that I think that it's important to come back to the idea fundamentally that is one language about which to talk about these issues. And that is the language that a highly resource intensive capitalist culture making, system of production requires. But for me, what matters is the fact that when 66% of the gang members shown in American movies are Black, but the FBI says that 30% are, and when I'm walking down the street and the assumption is that I'm some sort of criminal predator, that has a material effect on my life, and it has a material effect on the lives of literally everybody around the world. And so if I need to make the argument in dollars to make the human argument elsewhere, I'll do it. And that was basically what the McKinsey study was. But for me, look, I've been often asked to describe what a good movie is, and I don't have a good answer. But I do have what I think is a good answer for what good art is, which is arguably more difficult, but I'm gonna go with it. And that is that it's a confrontation with someone else's humanity and ideally also your own. And I think that when we have an experience with art and we're confronted by someone else's humanity, possibly the artist, possibly somebody else's, and we're also confronted by our own humanity, that leaves us fundamentally changed. And I think in the same way that Agnes Gunn, acted in a quite substantial way, after seeing 13th, we all act in almost imperceptibly different ways when we're confronted by other people's humanity. And the aggregate result of that humanity, that changed humanity, is, fundamentally unquantifiable, but also undeniable. And so art that is widely exposed has limitless power that we're never going to be able to put a precise sort of figure on. But I don't think that we as a society have even begun to reckon with what that power actually is. And that's why it's become the sort of preoccupying question of my life.
Thank you.
Now I have a question, because if I'd seen this panel, I would have called Sarah and begged for a ticket. So the fact that I'm on it is absurd. So I'm going to take this opportunity to ask all of you who I have admired for so long a question, if that's all right with you, Sarah.
Of course, no, that's what we want. Thank you.
So one of the things that in knowing all of your biographies and knowing how they differ from mine, and part of the reason why I'm suffering from a profound experience of imposter syndrome at this precise moment, is that you are all both art makers and cultural leaders. And your cultural leaders obviously within the Black community, but I would argue that no serious person could make the argument that you're not cultural leaders sort of nationwide and worldwide. And I'm really curious, as somebody who hasn't exercised the muscle of art making in quite a long time, and it's probably good for the world. How do you balance the two? Because I think of them as profoundly different skills, and you all are both profoundly exceptional art makers, but also leaders of movements, organizers of spaces, structurers of arts economies. And I'm just curious how you do that. Anyone can jump in here because it applies to all of you.
Yeah, sure. Why don't you start?
Thanks, Carrie Mae. I mean, it's actually kind of a complicated question, Franklin, because, on one level, I feel like you have a brain and your brain is transitive. You can do things, right? And in this case, if my brain is geared towards solving problems, then those problems are sometimes in the studio, they're sometimes in a museum space, and then there's sometimes in urban space or Black space or white space, that the problem solving is exciting, and to materialize thought, in space is a pleasure. But there are definitely times, and I think that Alvin Ailey, is a good example of that, but maybe also like the Rauschenberg Foundation, that there are moments when your life has these epics, or at least I feel like my life, there's a series of epics. And in one epic, it's really important to me to make work that lands in the world, that makes sense to the world, that these deep encounters with viewers and my life's worth, what might seem my purpose, seems tied to that. And then at some point, maybe if there's another epic where it's like, man, I've learned so much from giving myself to this world, and that others should do it. And then I find myself kind of teetering between the life of my own artistic practice in the life of others. Now, Glenn Ligon has this beautiful sculptural work, wall work that says me, we. And I also think that Black people have a difficult time separating their own personal successes from the success of the Black community. And so you find yourself creating a new organization in part because you see the thing that's missing and want to solve for the thing that's missing. So I'll just start with that, you know, and leave it open for my colleagues, because it is a conundrum. Like, I wish I had more time to make, but I also wish I had more time to build. You know?
And I think of them as being very much like the sort of the same thing, that they are just simply emerging out of the same head, and that the process really is that you know, that the work exists across multiple platforms, that it's not one thing, that it's several things, and that you're, so I love convening people. I love gathering people. Theaster loves gathering people. Sarah loves gathering people. Ava loves, right? I mean, the idea that we gather, I think, is a very important, this is a very important idea. And yes, that we, right? You know, me and we, right, is sort of deeply connected. I am not going any place without my colleagues. I'm not going any place without my friends. I'm not going any place without my loved ones. I am not, right? My art world means nothing to me without my colleagues, to bring them with me, to figure out the paths that have been made for me, and then to figure out how to widen the path for others through not only what I make, but how I go about convening and structuring a convening that allows for many, many different kinds of voices to be in and around the table. Theaster's Black retreats, Black art retreats, were also sort of similar sort of moments in that sort of way, and the projects that I've done here in New York. But I've been doing them all my life, and I don't imagine that I'm going to stop. It's simply another way of working and of being open. And the thing to me that I think is really sort of important about the idea of gathering is that sometimes you gather in spite of yourself, right? And that you can only gather based on friendship. If the gatherings, this gathering, is based on a set of friendships, right? Of mutual respect, of understanding. These are long relationships. These did not happen last week, right? Because Sarah asked us to show up, right? And that indeed that, you know, she's been honored by organizing her own panel. You see, she is organizing her own panel in the process of being honored, right? Now, right?
That would be a fine example for sure.
Well, I want to go to something that Theaster was saying. First, I want to just talk about how much love I have for him. I don't know him, you know, we not, but I love his name. I love his mission. I love the way he speaks. I love when he talked about how the act of doing the art that he does puts his thing in the sharper focus. And we have the time now to reflect on things and get deep into them. And as we get deeper into them, they become clearer and clearer to us in the whole metaphoric relationship of what you do to what everything is. And I think that's how you bridge the gulf between running institutions, having a cultural vision, and performing your craft. It's you take the metaphor, the symbolic common ground that you have. If you think about planning and execution and individual action, well, if you write a score for 70 people and you have to account for 50 minutes, everything every person on the stage will do graphically, you have to figure out, can a drummer play a tambourine here and go across the stage to a xylophone and play that in 3 beats? That's in the context of 840,000 notes, all of which will have a dot or a dash or sforzando or something of the type of the macro thinking of, I want this movement to do this. The micro work of putting a dot and dash on all those notes, you don't want to do that. So you think about, if you are the leader, first you would wonder whether to tie into what everybody's been saying, do you have a mission that's worth other people being a part of? Carrie Mae was saying, she deals with the whole communality that she has with her audience. Some things you think about, why should anybody care about that? But you have other thoughts that we all are thinking about it. What is the question? Hey, I've thought about that. So you get to that fundamental thing with your leadership. What is my mission? Then what is the mission of our institution? With jazz, it's a different art form because we're always co-creating. I don't care how many notes you write. You're not writing the rhythm section apart because they're making that part up. And if your rhythm section is sad, your band is sad. And they're in the background. So you begin to, I think institutional leadership is a lot like preparing and conducting a score, but playing is executing in public. Now that's a different thing. And the way I like them is you have to try to align the mission with the mechanics. And the mechanics of the mission just feel full of fervor and feeling, you know, Theaster, you get happy. But once you get down and you start doing that practice and you start putting things together, hey, it's just not, it's not the same fervor. And we have to always remember that execution meets corruption. And that's when goals fail. Hey, we got a $40 billion package for everybody. But guess what? Of the $40 billion, the people you say you're gonna get that money to, 200,000 is gonna get to them because of mechanics. So I think we have to be also dream and just dream big and be with this type of passion. It's in everybody's voice. Ava, even when she was saying it, and I want y'all to know before we came on, she said, don't call on me first.
I know.
But when she came in first, she was on a vibe and she came and she said, okay. She went right to her thing. And so I think mission and mechanics.
When, you know, this makes me think, and thank you, brother. This makes me think of I think about Miles Davis a lot, and I was thinking about Sketches of Spain and the choices that we make, and this is more like an aesthetic and administrative idea. The choices we make are the difference between, let's say, Miles Davis and Ornette Coleman. That Miles had a way of being slow, coolly, or like with no less intensity, with no less intentionality, but maybe fewer notes than Ornette, right? And so it's also not about, you know, if we were talking about the aesthetics of our administration or the aesthetics of our impact. Some people do lots of little things fast, right? And then other people are like, right? And it's like, but what I love about Black folk is that the intensity is no less there, whether that clip is a movie a year or a movie every two. Like I think about Sade and D'Angelo. It's like, man, if D'Angelo doesn't make another hit for 20 years, I'm still on brown sugar. You know what I mean? And so I wanted to say that to you because I think music does provide us with this lens toward the metaphysical life and a way of structuring our lives. And it's like, I used to run at an Ornette Coleman clip. I'm reaching a Miles Davis pace these days, like slow intentionality. And, you know, and this makes me think about, Ava, you know, I had some questions for you because, you know, I love you, you know, I love you tremendously. And I'm so grateful for the friendship that we've developed. But I remember one time you were a little bit mad at me, you know, about Black Artist Retreat and the invitation, right? Because it was like, look, well, how you gonna, I'm an artist, I'm Black, how you gonna not invite me? And I apologized by saying that I had thought that you had gotten up to a point in your career in making a certain kind of film, that the film was so big that it would seem like the issues for you as an artist were different from a New York-based artist who was struggling to pay $3,000 rent. And I tried to give that example, but I imagine that the issues for us as artists, that the issues actually don't change. Yeah. And so I wanted to ask you, you know, are there ever times that you want to make another kind of film? A film that sits somewhere differently, or I'm asking about that inner creative thing. And I want you to know that whatever you want to do, you know that you have our love and support.
Thank you, and love to you too. No, I was really mad at you, and that was not what you said to me. Let's get this correct. Let's straighten it up.
Okay.
Here we go. This is the
And
this is the conversation.
This panel is so beautiful because it was exactly what was the crux of our conversation, because I had heard that you have this beautiful Black artist retreat. I consider myself a Black artist. I think Wynton considers himself a Black artist, but we weren't invited because this was it was about disciplines, like a certain discipline. And so I always said, God, what if we had the artists get together cross discipline? The architects and the filmmakers and the poets and the musicians and the fine artists and the painters and the sculptors, and like, because that is what Black art, it goes beyond that discipline. So we talked about that, and this panel is really that idea of just sharing across disciplines, because at the core of it, there's commonality to the maybe not the practice, but the intention behind the practice. And so anyway, that's why I was mad.
Thank
and then
you.
you said some things, then I wasn't mad. Then we but I love the idea of opening it up and talking to artists from other disciplines. And that's why I was just fascinated by what Wynton was saying about touching all of these iconic artists from the Black artistic legacy and knowing them personally. Who else is going to be like, yeah, I was hanging out with Romero. You were just hanging out at his house? Like, yeah, and it was Ellison. It's like, what, how did that happen? What a life. But that idea of our interconnectedness and really looking to foster that more is a part of, I think, what I'm wrestling with right now. Because I say that idea and then literally was like, oh yeah, I can put together a whole organization and infrastructure around that, like right now, if we wanted to. And that's what I feel my problem is, right? When we talk about convening and we talk about organization, and we talk about really the institution building that we're all a part of, I've really been struggling lately with the fact that the reason why I do it is because my objectives and intentions are not sustainable within the system that I work without me doing all that additional labor. Because you all are really go-getters, but if I could, I would make a film. I'd be D'Angelo film. I'd be like, bam, see you later. If I could, but I cannot, because my work won't be seen within this system that I work. It won't be sustained. I might be able to get one film off, but it's not sustainable. And so I have to have array and organization and build platforms and systems and be doing all this building, which I enjoy, but it's because it's mandatory for my core art practice. I have to disrupt all the stuff that locks me in the film world in order to get my voice out and through in a sustainable, consistent way. And I've come to start to, I won't say resent it, but I'm feeling a way, I'm feeling a way that I have to do that here. Yeah. And also at the same time, enjoying the community building that I'm doing. But knowing, I think it's important to know, for me to recognize its origin. Yeah. Its origin is coming from an absence that I've seen and felt.
That's right.
And something that I'm looking to fill, not just for me, but for others, but feel in a way that I even have to. And so that's kind of at the core as I think about it. And there's this thing happening in Hollywood right now where everyone's got a company. You know what I mean? If you say any big name, and much respect to all my colleagues, because we're all doing the same thing. Michael B. Jordan, Issa, Lena, Charles King, Franklin. We are in a time right now, it's like, oh, I'm gonna build up all this stuff around me so that I can get my voice out the way I want. Yeah. And that maybe that would be sustainable. And so it's a bit of a shift in this current generation of Black artists working in the traditional film space that is requiring a lot of additional labor that I fear is clouding my core intention, which was just to be able to make my movies the way I wanted. But now I got all this stuff, Right. And I wonder, and I put this to all of you who are institution building as a part of, I don't know if it's as a part of, but alongside of your art practice. And if you ever, have any feelings of what that additional labor may cost your voice. Or does it
Oh,
amplify it? Or does it
I-
amplify?
we're very much in the same place, right? Very much in the same place. And at the same time, though, I mean, for instance, this panel brought together around this notion of vision and justice, around a new set of materials, books, of this imprint, this whole new series that will be developed and imagined, that can be imagined, right? Out of this moment, I think is really sort of extraordinary. And so even when I'm sort of, that I have been resentful in certain ways of what I've had to do in order to do what I do, right? There's also a parts of it, as you were saying before, that that gives me great joy and great pleasure because of the community that gets built around building, right? And that ability to first of all, the ability to organize, the ability to do that, right? To have the wherewithal to do that and the understanding to do that, and that that it's bigger than you and therefore enlarging the shape and the scope of the field itself, right? So you've had to lay your body down in a certain kind of way, right? All of us, to a certain extent, have had to lay ourselves down in order for our cultural development and our historical development to be seen and understood anew. And so while it's not always pleasant, it's always necessary.
Carrie Mae,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, please.
And I'm going to do something together. I think we all need to be doing a project together.
Yes.
Okay, we got this on record. Now don't say it.
Theaster is doing
Don't say it if you don't mean it.
Don't have me and Ava. We will feel a certain way about it. But I want to just, one thing I just want to add from my personal experience. I learned so much from the people who helped to build the institution Jazz at Lincoln Center. They were older than me when we started. Many were the age of my parents. People like Ed Bradley, David Stern, Gordon Davis, Lisa Schiff. I could give the name of Jack Rudin, people in the community I never would have met if it were not for some civic thing that we embarked upon. And I learned an unbelievable amount. And I have such a depth of love for what they were willing to put in. When they first said this was what we were going to do, I thought they had lost their mind. I said, this is jazz. All we ever do in this is lose money. Y'all going to go ask people to do. And what I learned from them as a human being, and it enriched my art, it gave me possibilities I never would have had. And at that time, I was already on the road making much more money and doing anything I could have wanted to do personally. It was a great loss. And I'm going to leave you just one statement that I asked Dizzy Gillespie. Should I give my small group up and the bread that I'm making and the work that I'm doing and subsume my name to an institution and go in an environment where I have to answer to people? And he looked at me and said, to lose one's orchestral identity should not be considered an achievement. If you can put a big band together, you sacrifice and put that band together. And I've never regretted it. To this day, we have younger students that can play. We're trying to do what we can to provide for them. The greatest thing that ever happened to me in my entire life was to be able to work with these citizens. The depth of their understanding about so many things has added immeasurably to my life and defined me as an adult. So I don't want to cut Theaster off, man. I don't want you to say, I'm gonna be going to Limbs. I'm gonna call you when I go to Limbs to get some of those hot links.
Hey, the 70, we waiting on you, bro. But I wanted to say, Sarah, and I think this is also kind of a testimony to you and in tribute to the work that you're doing, that the thing that Ava's talking about and Wynton's talking about are these tools, that we have developed, that our parents and grandparents sacrificed to send us to school. Carrie Mae, there's a new kind of labor, because my mom and dad, they were chopping cotton. They were working hard. They had conviviality, but it was different. They didn't call it conviviality. They were working hard, and I think that I inherited their labor, but we've been given new tools. And I feel like we're in a set of generations where we're learning how to flex our use of those tools.
Yes.
And Ava, to your point, all of the new company making, it's a byproduct of us learning new languages that will help us squarely position Black power in the future structures of our country. And that what are corporations today will become foundations. When Michael B. Jordan dies, as things go on, there'll be new institutional weight in the ground, in legal structures that we didn't have before. And I think it is a sacrifice. It is a different kind of labor. And I struggle, because if I was to do roll call, it's like, I don't want to be a real estate developer and a chamber of commerce and a non-for-profit founder and an artist and a professor. Like, there is nothing about those titles. But if we were to wrap all that shit up,
this is exactly the core of what I was asking about.
but if you wrap it all up and you call that an artistic practice, we're simply doing the things that we need to do so that we can have the impact at which, and I think it's if we were doing little shit, we'd be fine. But the truth is, we want to do huge things. And in order to do huge things, there are very few people who are going to believe in us the way we might believe in ourselves. And so I'm just saying to this table, anything y'all want to do, I want to believe in it with you.
That's right.
Can I just say this? This is the problem. I go visit Theaster, and we're walking around city blocks. I mean, he's like telling me stories about that place and that place. I did not know who he was. I didn't know him. I didn't know who he was really. A mutual friend said, "Do you know Theaster? You're going to Chicago." No, I don't know Theaster. I don't really know much about Chicago. Meet this brother. We walk around city blocks. I was introduced to you while we were walking around. Like, I had to go Google after we left. I'd be like, oh, damn, this is what these spaces were spaces that you had harnessed, not even developed, like grabbed it, embraced it, and made it into something new and beautiful. And I saw that, and now I'm hooked, because I see this is your fault, what's going on with me right now, because I saw you doing that. And then I said,
is there a connection here with your space?
What's that?
Is there a connection here with your space? Because that's the other question I wanted to ask y'all. You all gather people in spaces as part of your practice. And it's one of the things that I admire most about all of you as well. And I'm just curious, Ava, how much of Array's glory, and if you come to LA and have a chance to see it, I highly recommend it, is informed by what Theaster's up to in Chicago.
Directly informed, yeah. I went in and walked around Theaster's place. About a month later, I was shooting 13th in DC, and I went to Haile Gerima Sankofa bookstore, which he calls liberated territory. I was like, I want some of that too. Then a short time later, I was talking to Oprah Winfrey, and she was telling me about Harpo Studios and the evolution of owning that space in that city block. And then I had an appointment and a meeting with J.J. Abrams, and I went to Bad Robot in Santa Monica. And I was like, you know what? It's time. I need some space. I need some liberated territory. And, very deliberately influenced by Theaster, Mr. Gerima, Miss Winfrey, JJ, but this idea of, artists claiming physical space, commandeering, harnessing a space, both for oneself and for other artists, became something that was infectious. And the project, the part of Array and part of what I was speaking about earlier, that does not feel like labor, feels like pure joy. And it's the claiming and vibrancy of that space that's the favorite part of my day. It's become even more joyful to me than being on set, which is also my space, but not my space. And so, just the whole idea of home and home building and community building and claiming space, not just claiming the space, building that space and that blossoming are all things that make my first in my feelings questions. It softens it. And I always am reminded of, my anchor, and that's the space.
I do want to just be transparent about one aspect of this panel for the sake of the audience, who I think is probably looking and saying, oh, they're going over an hour. We are over an hour because I think we're so enjoying the conversation. I hope we can go a little bit longer if that's all right, because we haven't been able to ask a question from the audience. But the real reason for bringing us together for me personally, was that this fellowship is required for the labor that we're discussing right now, that we are doing together. One of the most powerful nights I've had just pre-COVID was one in which Ava DuVernay was in town with the whole crew creating When They See Us. And I had just gone to set with David Adjaye, talking here again about coming together across disciplines, and I saw the sacrifice and the strength that was required to put that together, and said, we need to bring some fellowship around Ava and Bradford Young. And, Kehinde Wiley opened up his home, bring the artists in, let's salute them, and Carrie Mae Weems was there, and Jerry Castile was there, Deborah Willis, Kelly Jones, and I thought, this is what we need to do more of, right? This is what allows for that endurance. You're talking, Wynton, when you did your roll call and thinking about August Wilson and his endurance, I think about the kind of circles that he had to keep around him, the way to support the work. So thank you to Frieze for this tribute and for giving us the opportunity to come together to nourish all of our work, to cross-pollinate ideas. There's probably not a problem that we could put out in this panel that we couldn't solve together, So that's in part why I wanted to start with you, Ava, because I think about the way in which you are radically transforming an entire industry and field. And so wanted to just put that on the table first. But the questions we have from the Q&A chat, I should say, are really, some of them are encomiums, praise, thanking everyone. But there's because of the crisis we're in, I think a fundamental question that's threaded through them is about how the pandemic is changing our ways of considering space and gatherings. But to put a kind of positive spin on there's one that's come from June Cohen, who's asking, if we had the power to instantly bring about one concrete, achievable change in American society, what would that change be? And I wonder if we might give some time to a question like that. Let's see, I don't know if you'd like to begin, but and maybe that question is not more labor, right? But I think it would be good to think about together.
I think we need to change the pictures in the family album book that we showing people. And we all have them ugly moments. I never went into one person's house nowhere in the world and they pull out, man, this is when we had that fight, or this when I dumped spaghetti on my son's head, or this is when me. People not showing you all the dysfunction they deal with. I'm not saying for us to pretend like it don't exist or to fake, but the mythology cannot lead us into a heroism that does not include pluralistic thoughts. We have a tendency to not believe in the democratic process, which you see right now. First day of class, I ask my students all the time, what is the Constitution designed to do? The thought of spreading out power and of leveling the playing field is no longer our objective. Our objective is to make as much money as we can, segregate ourselves from everybody else. Another one, I got a shout out to Theaster about that. He's in the community. I don't want to think that I'm stalking him, but I'm just in the flow of what I'm saying is for real. And the fact that we have 51 constitutions is what is protecting the United States Constitution. So we're waiting for it to come from above a certain way, but it's got to come from down below, and more participation. And the one suggestion I have is make everybody swing dance. Because that's going to cure the pornography and all the stuff we're marketing to kids and the way we exploiting them. It makes you have respect for a partner.
Yeah.
It makes you.
Yeah.
And we've lost that. We're talking about love. I'm gonna go back to what, we're saying. We need the physical representation that the electric slide is not making it at weddings. It's got to be something intergenerations can do. And what we're doing in the other front, we can't have that.
But that question, about the social function of music is really what inspired me to think about the function of images. And Ava, in the interview in Vision and Justice, you spoke about the intimacy of images, how these narratives that we carry with us really do become our DNA and change how it is that we create our lives. So Wynton, thank you for that, because it is a way in which these disciplines speak to each other. And this is really what's led to the project. I know that I don't want to commandeer all of your time. We are so busy. But I wonder, as we kind of round out maybe the end of a conversation I do not want to end, and will not, you all won't be privy to it, but we're going to have this again somewhere else. Because Wynton, you're sitting by the piano there. If you might remind us back to this word, ethereal, sort of Carrie Mae Weems was just using to describe music way, how music has created a core sense for us of understanding what freedom feels like. There are ways in which there's a fundamental, yeah. So why don't you give us one example or two of that?
So we're in the pocket. We're in the pocket. And I think that there's something about this that's so extraordinary to me, that sense that you know when you're in the pocket, you know when you're there, and you know when you're not there. And I think as I search for truth and justice in my life, through my life, seeking for that deeper truth that has the ability to elevate us all, I'm simply trying to get as deep into the pocket as I possibly can.
Yes, ma'am.
Work that I do.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for bringing us together, for bringing together this wonderful, wonderful afternoon. It's just really great to see you all. And Theaster, I hope that you're organizing a dinner for us very soon.
All of us, Theaster, all of us.
Hold him to it.
He's the quasi-artist over here, please.
Hold him to it.
Definitely be there. We've got to have you. This is fantastic. Thank you all so much. And we'll see you.
Thank you, Sarah. Congratulations.
Pandemic.
Bye, everyone.